All right, in chapter 5, we are dealing with neural adaptations in training. So these adaptations begin at the higher brain centers and then continue to move down to the level of individual fibers. During these new exercises or learning a new movement, the cortex, the motor cortex activity, it greatly increases. And with anaerobic training, this enhances the reflex responses in the body. And this type of training helps increase the total area of the neuromuscular junction, which enables more synapses. It lengthens the end plate, and at that site there is more acetylcholine. I have a hard time pronouncing that. There's more acetylcholine receptors at that site whenever you're doing this kind of training. And with skeletal muscles too, they also adapt to anaerobic training, like in muscle hypertrophy, the increase of the cross-sectional area of existing fibers, they get larger. And then with hyperplasia, the number of muscle fibers are increased, and that happens by longitudinal fiber splitting. Speaking of fibers, there's two types, type 1 and type 2. The type 2 are much greater in size, and these occur during like training and anything that is intense, really. To help enhance the release of calcium, you can do sprints. Sprinting helps the release of calcium. MES is minimal essential strain, and this is essentially the formation of new bone. And speaking of new bone, the trabecular bone, I think I'm pronouncing it right, the trabecular bone, it responds more rapidly to stimuli than cortical. So moving on, so the 4 components of mechanical load, which helps stimulate bone growth, they are number 1, intensity. Number 2, the speed or the rate. Number 3 is the direction and the direction of the forces. And number 4 would be the number of repetitions. And so talking about stimulus for growth and injury, from any mechanical force will stimulate this type of growth. So moving on to joints. Joints lack its own blood supply, and it must depend on diffusion of oxygen and nutrients from synovial fluid. And this joint mobility is linked to joint health. So moving on, all right, so here's the deal with consistent resistance training. This helps improve acute hormonal response to anaerobic exercise, and it is less likely to be a chronic change in resting hormonal concentrations. And with this type of training, the androgen receptor are upregulated within 48 to 72 hours after exercise. And so anaerobic exercises increase cardiovascular responses. For instance, like it decreases or has no change to resting heart rate or blood pressure. And then just a couple definitions like about overtraining. Overtraining happens when there's a chronic use of high intensity or high volume, and that results in like fatigue, illness, or injury. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum with detraining, that results in loss of gains or physiological adaptations. That's a nicer way to put it. But yeah, if you don't work out, you stop working out, then you'll lose your gains way quicker than when you gain them. It sucks.